Ricky Morton is 69 years old now, and he finally talked about the 6 wrestlers he truly hated the most. And honestly, the names he mentioned might shock you. So let's get into it and uncover all the drama. 1. Parrot Midnight Express. When people talk about Ricky Morton's biggest enemies in wrestling, the very first name that comes up is the Midnight Express. And honestly, it makes perfect sense. This wasn't just a normal feud or some random storyline. They built their careers fighting each other. Ricky Morton and Robert Gibson, the Rock and Roll Express, spent years battling the Midnight Express, and the hatred between the teams became part of wrestling history. What made this rivalry so intense was how real it felt. Every time they stepped in the ring together, you could feel that spark, almost like they genuinely couldn't stand each other. And a lot of fans believe that Ricky Morton truly hated the Midnight Express because the matches were so emotional, so chaotic, and so personal. The chemistry between the two teams was electric, but the tension behind the scenes was just as strong. When you keep fighting the same guys night after night, city after city, it stops feeling like just business. It becomes personal, and that's exactly what happened here. Their war started in Mid-South, where both teams were young, hungry, and trying to make their name. They were total opposites. Rock and Roll were the clean-cut heartthrobs who fans adored, while the Midnight Express were cocky, sneaky, and proud of it. That clash in personality created magic. Every arena they entered was already buzzing because people knew something crazy was about to happen. The feud hit its peak in the NWA Jim Crockett Promotions, where they delivered legendary matches that are still talked about today. Whether it was Bobby Eaton and Dennis Condrey, or the later pairing with Stan Lane, the Midnight Express were always the perfect villains to Ricky Morton's underdog hero. And the heat was unbelievable. Fans screamed, threw things, cried, and begged for Ricky to survive the beatdowns he got every night. The Midnight Express didn't just wrestle Ricky, they tore him apart with double teams, cheap shots, and non-stop trash talk. And Ricky, being the master of selling pain, made everything look 10 times worse. Over time, the rivalry became the foundation of Ricky Morton's career. It pushed him, tested him, and sometimes flat out broke him. But it also made him a star. And if you ask him today which wrestlers he truly hated facing the most, the Midnight Express will always be right at the top because they were the ones who put him through absolute hell night after night. 2. Ric Flair. When Ricky Morton talks about the wrestlers he hated facing, Ric Flair is always high on that list. And not because Flair wasn't talented. It was because their rivalry got personal, really personal. In the mid-80s, Ricky Morton was one of the biggest babyfaces in the NWA. Women screamed for him everywhere he went, and that popularity actually annoyed Ric Flair, the NWA World Heavyweight Champion, who built his whole image around being the stylin', profilin', kiss-stealin' ladies' man. So when Flair saw crowds of women losing their minds for Ricky, it sparked a jealousy that turned their storyline into something fierce and brutal. The feud kicked off when Flair made fun of Ricky for being a pretty boy, saying Morton didn't deserve the attention he got. Ricky fired back, and that was enough to set Flair off. The Nature Boy wasn't used to being challenged by tag team guys, and he hated the idea of this younger, smaller star stealing part of his spotlight. So Flair did what he always did when he felt threatened. He fought dirty. And that's when the 4 Horsemen got involved. One of the most infamous moments of the feud happened when the Horsemen attacked Morton and smashed his face into a ring post, breaking his nose. It was a vicious beatdown, and it made the rivalry feel real. Fans weren't sure where the line between storyline and actual hatred was anymore. Ricky Morton sold the injury so well, and Flair acted so arrogant and cruel that people genuinely believed Flair had crossed the line out of jealousy. Their matches were emotional because they were built on 2 totally different worlds colliding. Flair was the champion, the legend, the guy on top of the mountain. Ricky Morton was the underdog, the smaller guy who represented the people. And every time they faced off, the crowd wanted Ricky to shock the world and take the belt from Flair. Even though he never won the title, those matches showed that Ricky could hang with the best. 3. Four Horsemen. Even though Ricky's biggest singles rivalry was with Ric Flair, the Rock and Roll Express had their own long and painful history with the Horsemen's tag team combinations. Whether it was Arn Anderson teaming with Ole Anderson, or later Arn teaming with Tully Blanchard, the result was always the same. The Horsemen were looking to beat down Ricky and Robert, embarrass them, and send a message to the entire locker room. What made these battles so intense was how different the two teams were. The Rock and Roll Express were fast, exciting, high energy, and loved by the fans. They brought fun into the ring, and they connected with people in a way few teams ever had. Meanwhile, the Horsemen were the complete opposite: slow, methodical, mean, and always ready to cheat. Arn Anderson alone was a nightmare: cold, serious, and powerful. Ole was pure, old-school toughness, and Tully was one of the cockiest, dirtiest players in the game. Put any combination of them together, and you had trouble. Their matches felt like wars. The Horsemen didn't just want to win, they wanted to break Ricky Morton, and they nearly did, many times. Ricky would take a beating like no one else, getting tossed around, stomped out, and trapped in that ring, while fans screamed for him to fight back. That classic Ricky Morton sympathy the crowd loved, a lot of it came from facing the Horsemen, because no one tortured him more than they did. And then there were the constant sneak attacks. The Horsemen jumped them backstage, during interviews, inside the locker room, anywhere they felt like making a statement. To them, beating up Ricky and Robert wasn't just business. It was a way to prove the Horsemen were unbeatable. 4. Van Koloff and Nikita Koloff. When you look back at Ricky Morton's career, one rivalry that always stands out is his war with Ivan Koloff and Nikita Koloff. If the Midnight Express brought the speed and Ric Flair brought the jealousy, the Koloffs brought pure, brute force. These guys were built like tanks, and they wrestled like they wanted to run straight through anyone standing in their way, especially the Rock and Roll Express. In 1985 and 1986, the feud between the two teams was everywhere. The NWA World Tag Team titles were practically bouncing back and forth between them, and every match felt like a fight for survival rather than a regular wrestling match. Ivan Koloff, the Russian Bear, was the veteran. He was tough, mean, and proud of his reputation. Nikita Koloff was the monster, young, muscular, and explosive. Together, they felt unstoppable, and they knew it. For Ricky Morton, facing the Koloffs was a nightmare because they were nothing like the teams he usually fought. These guys didn't rely on flashy moves or slick tricks. They relied on power, intimidation, and raw aggression. Every time Ricky stepped into the ring with them, he knew he was about to take a beating. Nikita's clothesline alone was enough to flip a man inside out, and Ivan's boots and forearms were like getting hit with a tree trunk. The Rock and Roll Express had speed and teamwork, but the Koloffs had strength and fury. That contrast made their matches wild, emotional, and unpredictable. When they traded the NWA tag titles, fans were glued to every second. One night, Ricky and Robert were leaving the arena as champions, and the next night, Nikita and Ivan were storming out with the belts after smashing them into the mat. What made this feud even better was how different the personalities were. Ricky Morton was the beloved underdog, the guy fans wanted to protect. The Koloffs were seen as cold, heartless villains who didn't care about the cheers. They wanted domination. Ricky hated how they bullied their way through matches, using their size to crush opponents and overpower him every chance they got. 5. Robert Gibson. Out of all the names Ricky Morton could ever talk about, none hits harder than Robert Gibson. This was the one feud that didn't feel like wrestling. It felt personal. These two weren't just tag partners, they were brothers in every way except blood. For years, the Rock and Roll Express lived on the road together, wrestled together, took beatings together, and rose to fame together. So when Robert Gibson turned his back on Ricky in 1991, joining the York Foundation and calling himself Richard Morton, it wasn't just shocking, it felt like a knife in the back. The whole thing went down during their WCW run, and fans could hardly believe it. Robert Gibson was always the steady, loyal partner, the guy who stood by Ricky no matter what. But suddenly he was wearing suits, acting cold, and letting Alexandria York whisper in his ear like he was a brand new man. He even changed his name, dropping Robert and calling himself Richard Morton to fit the group's gimmick. And that small change said everything. He wasn't the same person anymore. For Ricky, facing Robert in the ring was one of the hardest things he ever did. This wasn't like fighting the Midnight Express or dodging Ric Flair's cheap shots. This was emotional. You could see it in Ricky's eyes every time they stared each other down. He hated what Robert had become. He hated that the York Foundation brainwashed his partner. And he hated that the man he trusted more than anyone was now hitting him, mocking him, and acting like their entire history meant nothing. The matches between them were short-lived, but they were intense. Ricky wrestled with a mix of anger and heartbreak, and Robert, now Richard, acted distant and cold, working a more technical, robotic style that fit his new persona. Fans weren't just watching a feud, they were watching a friendship fall apart in real time. The crowd always sided with Ricky because they knew how much he carried that betrayal. The Rock and Roll Express wasn't supposed to break. They were the team that survived everything. The Midnight Express, the Horsemen, the Koloffs. But the one thing Ricky couldn't survive without getting hurt was losing Robert. Even though they eventually reunited later in their careers, that 1991 storyline left a scar. If you ask Ricky who he hated facing the most, not as an opponent but as a heartbreak, Robert Gibson's name is right there. Because nothing stings like fighting the person who once stood beside you for years. And that wraps up today's video. Make sure to hit like and subscribe so you never miss any new updates.